Yeah, we want to present you today Blaue Pampelmuse and our first production, which is a TV series, 13 episodes by 4 minutes, basically produced from scratch. To start off, I want to introduce ourselves. So Elisa and I, we basically founded Blaue Pampelmuse, and we're joined later on from Jonas for the technical part. He's also later covering. And our origin is basically we met at the Animation Institute in Ludwigsburg, studying animation, and moved to Leipzig 2020, roundabout, in the wonderful city, where we now have our small studio space in this dreamlike little train station. And 2020, basically in the start of Corona, we were both freelancing, and then we had the chance basically to try to develop our own first IP or content, which was a project in a nutshell, pilot episode for a series concept about emotions, basically. And we were lucky because it had a lot of positive resonance in terms of the festivals, but also with the local film funds, basically. And so it came that we also developed another TV concept, which was, or is now called Kitsu and the Dream Globe Tales. It's a little bit clunky, the name, but we just call it Kitsu and Maya. It's just it's based on a German name, and it's really hard yet to translate. Yeah, it's based on fairy tales and folklore, basically, from a minority in the east of Germany, which is where every sign, basically street signs and so on, are in both languages. And it has it is a Slavic minority. And Elisa, who's the director for the series, is from Poland, so there was direct a connection between the minority and her and the fairy tales. And I mean, when you're in Europe, it's all a huge mix-up. You have dwarves and so on in every folklore. So this is kind of cool, and it was for us a huge thing to say there's this small thing, and it feels like fantasy names, but actually they are real places for the people who know them, and for everyone else it's basically, it's just fantasy. We were lucky enough to develop the strip with some funding from the also Sorbian Cultural Funds, and find then a partner and a broadcaster, and start basically the funding from our side. So it took some years, and now we are releasing in October. The partner that we found is this little guy. Since 60 years, he's basically there in Germany, and is a bedtime routine television show. And it's basically a framework, so it's a stop-motion animation, but inside there are always small animation series. And we were really lucky that they trusted us, and this is basically how we also funded started the company, basically. So this was the task. We had a TV series planned, 13 episodes. I already said 4 minutes roundabout. And so it's for us it was a huge volume, 50 minutes. We worked on bigger production, but we never managed to do something like this on our own. So this was a heavy task, basically. And yeah, maybe I just show some. What? It's German.
Vogeltraum, lass uns in die Geschichte schauen.
Vor vielen Jahren war der Nachthimmel über der Lausitz noch ganz still. Man konnte viele Sternschnuppen beobachten und sich etwas wünschen.
Hallo Lisa, zeig uns, wie du zielen kannst. Willkommen bin? Piep, 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 piep. Wir sind die Irrlinge.
So this is basically how we started. We had the story, and the story had some issues. In general, we planned to have like a concept stage where we tried to figure out how to solve them, then make a proof of concept where we just said like, okay, how, like a slice down of a project usually, and then we jump into the production. So this was the general idea how we would like to approach the thing, and how it ended, we're gonna see. But we had some challenges in the beginning where we didn't have a pipeline or anything comparable. Every episode is basically a new fairy tale, so there was no consistency between these elements and no assets. It's the best thing that you can have with a TV series, that you can't share anything. The same thing for the sets, basically. The budget was, even though it was like a co-production, it was obviously limited, and we had a really small team. How we approached, or what our status quo in this time was, that we had a super motivated team. The partners gave us a lot of freedom and creativity in terms of creativity and how we produced this, which was super nice. And we had actually kind of like enough time, and enough time is like, you never have enough time. And like we're doing 3D, you could spend years reiterating the whole thing. As soon as you finish, you start again, and then you start again, and then you start again, and every time it becomes a little bit nicer. So, but we had a lot of like resources. There was no pressure. Yeah, we had a super nice. The broadcaster was super nice in terms of like delivery and so on. So we had a rough plan that was dragged out, and that helped a lot. And we had kind of different kind of production experiences from from feature film to TV series and so on, not as artists basically. So we all have an artist background, even though we jumped into the role of a production company kind of. So this was basically our starting point. The first approach that we needed said like, what are we able to do on our own, and what do we want to focus on basically. We reached out for a subcontractor studio which was able to deliver basically the animation, because we wanted to say like, are we doing script and story and art style, look development and layout basically, but the animation itself we need to outsource because we are just too small to handle everything basically. And we also wanted to test work with partners together, because it's sometimes nice to see like, do you manage to collaborate with someone, or are you just crazy, yeah? Or sometimes you feel like you want to reinvent the wheel, yeah? Especially when you're doing 3D, you say like, we're gonna do everything completely different, it's gonna be super smart, and we're gonna skip this and skip this, and that usually doesn't work, and then you say like, yeah, maybe a little bit more like everyone is used to. So this was, for us, a good step to find partners that we can basically work with. And the other thing was like, from a conceptual perspective, how do we manage to get rid of so many characters? The script at itself had like 36 or something, and a lot of like sets and so on. And so the idea was, and you already saw it, you saw the result basically, every set, every story is basically like a small diorama, yeah, that you deep dive into it. And from the beginning on, you have a glimpse of what actually you are going to see. And with the characters, I'm gonna explain a little bit further. We deep dived with the core team into a hackathon that was in the beginning of the production basically, or in the end of the pre-production, and we were super lucky that we managed to have like the core departments, even though in the production they would be spread out or work to different kind of times, to get all together in one pot basically, and have 1 week where we just tested around. How does it feel to work together, and also how the concepts that we basically discussed beforehand, could they actually work, and how would they work, and what are the obstacles going forward from there on. So I'm just going to jump through the main topics, which are like the sets, the characters, and the pipeline. With the sets, we had this kind of idea of like one central picture that describes everything. So we have cut open areas where we just want to see what is in this mountain, yeah, where the dwarfs are walking, and to build basically the whole set in one go, and figure out from the concept we have the animatic and where's actually the stuff happening in there. And then we made the first projection test, because we wanted to work with a lot of like set projection and 2D matte painting basically, to jump basically into directly the result. And we also figured out that it is a little bit hard. We're going to talk about this later, the problems. We also managed, or Jonas also managed, and he's going to talk later more specific about this, like to attempt the first pipeline concept in terms of how we want to work together, basically. And we jumped into the character design where we defined these two siblings. And also the first idea how we can manage to get this concept regarding the roles rolling. And the idea was basically that these two within the stories basically play every creature, every person that is, and so on. So Kitsu, the small boy, is sometimes an old woman, or she is sometimes a nix, which is like a water creature. So they switch basically, and this was the idea, that we have like maybe a fixed set of proportions or something like that we can reuse as much as we can, and also maybe reuse some of like the animation and so on. Then after we had this kind of rough design, in the late stage of the hackathon, we also did like a small test of proof of concept in terms of how rough modeling of the current concept would look like in this kind of projected world. This was done in Eevee with a simple shader setup, and so this was. Then we jumped into production, and we needed now to basically be a bit more specific in terms of how the character design actually looks like. And we did reduce like the amount of details that we have to the maximum. We started off with the line art and did a rough projection, and figured out that we basically need to skip all the details that you normally would model. Yeah, so there's no. It's basically, this is the character. It looks like a Playmobil figure that you painted on, and this was sometimes like our go-to. Like the set is like a Playmobil set. Yeah, there are buildings that are not big enough that anyone can join. Everything is basically forced perspective, and the details are switchable because they are just painted onto the character. So this was basically the diffuse test of the texture, and then there was the shading of the character basically added. It's a mixture of like you have basically an RGB path, and then you have a lightning path with some additional information about the normals and so on, and then you mix them together. It was like the first Eevee shader built up, and next to it we had basically a render set up where we said like, this is the passes that we need to recreate the same shader system later on. This is for Kitsu, basically, with the texture variation and the first test with some of the animation. Oh. The loop killed the system. Yeah, so this is basically some of the normal preparation that we did with every model, and this was the simple Eevee shader basically behind it. It had some limitations because we wanted to reuse as much as we can from the model, and the head and the textures and the UDEMs and so on. So we never touched the face basically. We added sometimes elements. We had like an area where we said like, this is where we can add the head and so on. And we also didn't want to redo the weights for the arms and so on. So we just hid it particularly the mesh and added like a cloth when it's needed. Like for example, with Bojana here with the bluish dress. Yeah, and so we ended up basically with the character variations. We also never did like color exploration that are superposed because we needed to project them basically. We had like the artist paint them in basic 4K, and then we directly projected them from the front onto the mesh, and then we just painted the rest of it and generated a setup of like brush strokes that are similar in every application just to mimic the style. And so we ended up like with a pretty straightforward approach when it did come to this kind of character generation. A huge obstacle was the question how we want to do the faces, because faces are most of the time. We have a lot of talking head situations in this movie, so this was important that this works. And Jonas is going to tell us later about this, because this was like the easy part, let's say it like this. And everyone was happy that this worked so fine. With the concept of the set, we had different kind of like briefing, because of the hackathon helped us to identify problems with the idea of this kind of reduced set. The set wasn't really reduced, yeah? It was huge. The gaps between the elements that you basically don't need are gigantic. So the idea was to dense them down, basically, to really say that we're just jumping into this kind of diorama. It needs to be really condensed in terms of like where we actually are. So this was our go-to, and then we had two different approaches based on the availability of the team, basically. There was either first a sketch, and then the 3D team was blocking it directly, so we continue with the camera work, and then in the end we did the projection, or the more classical way where we already had like a production painting. It really depends on which stage, which episode was. Yeah, and so this is, for example, like a rough sketch where we never had like the final one, and then we had this was basically geometry in the end, which was just a little bit bended, so it works a little bit better with the camera, and yeah, and the result the same here with the giant, the episode with the giant. This was then basically the canvas that we worked on, and this is how it looked like when we rendered it, basically. Yeah, top.
All right. I'm Jonas. I'm a little sick today, so if my voice sounds a little weird, I'm sorry about that. I was the technical director on the TV show, and so I'm just going to walk you through like how we set up our pipeline, which is the boring part, and then how I did the faces, which was probably like one of the bigger struggles for the TV show to figure out how to do that. So yeah, the reality of the situation was that we're a small studio, and so we didn't have a huge team to take care of all the parts, so a lot of us ended up wearing a lot of different hats. So I got to do the pipeline, and I made the faces and some shading, so yeah, just got to do a lot of different stuff. And another thing was we had an external contracted animation studio, so that meant we really had to get the pipeline working well, and for all the rigs to work nicely for everyone. And yeah, I didn't get to spend as much time as would have probably been good on the TV show because of the limited budget, I guess. So we had to really figure out how to crunch everything into what we had. And yeah, the thing is, it's a lot of material. It was 13 episodes, and so if you look at that, it's a lot of work. And then that's the episodes, and then there's also all the assets, including all of the characters right there, which was a lot to work on. So yeah, this was our pipeline pretty much. The central parts were Kitsu for the project management, Dropbox for storage, which is not a good idea for productions. I would not recommend it. You should probably find a better solution if you're setting up your own pipeline. We used it because we already had it, and so that was sort of a legacy thing that we just kept using. And then the Blender add-on was something I made for the production, and the render farm, which I also made, so we got to use it for pretty cheap. And so yeah, the base of the pipeline was basically the folder structure, which we thought about in the beginning, like during the hackathon, how we want to split it up. So it's just a really simple structure: episode, shot, task for the shots, and then for the assets, it's asset type, task, and asset. So just those are the subfolders, and then for each we add the working folder where we have the different versions, and every time you saved a new version, it would iterate it with the version number, and when you published it, it would put it in a publish folder where you link it from or where you render from. So just a really simple setup. Yeah, Dropbox, bad idea, especially if you run into sync errors and maybe delete all of the production, which may have been my fault once. I think it happened twice, didn't it?
No, once.
Once? It was only my fault? Okay, good. Yeah, Kitsu, we hosted on AWS, which also try not to, rent the wrong instances there and make it really expensive. That's also a bad idea. We switched to hosting it locally now, which is a lot better. And yeah, one thing about Kitsu is like, I didn't want to have a really complicated two-way thing. So we basically just ended up publishing all the stuff to Kitsu, and on the add-on, on the add-on side, we were basically just interacting with the file structure, not with Kitsu at all. Yeah, the add-on, which is sort of like the glue of all the different parts. Yeah, the main part of it was artists should never have to dig through folders and spend more than a couple of seconds switching between files. I think that's a pretty simple concept. And so what the add-on will do is just look at the folder structure and create the drop-downs. And the good thing about that is that it works offline if you have everything synced and you don't have to communicate back and forth with Kitsu all the time. So yeah, this is what it ended up looking like at the end of the production once I had to add a bunch of stuff at every point. Yeah, it tells you like the information about the shot, and you have a bunch of options to do stuff. I don't know how interesting this is, to be honest, but like the init would create a new file, and you could choose what task you'd want to assign it to. And every time you switch to the next task, you do init again on the next task. And new revision just created a new file in the working folder, and publish would write to the publish folder where you could link from and render from, and would also create like a comment on Kitsu that you could type into the pop-up box. And yeah, so they all had this sort of interface where you could choose the different parts. One thing I really liked that I made was this fuzzy finder, so you could just type it in really badly and it would pick the right thing in the drop-downs, and then just open the folder and you open it. So yeah, I just wanted it to be as simple as possible and as fast as possible. I didn't want artists spending minutes opening files because that is a waste of time and money. And yeah, the asset browser. So another thing the publisher would do is would add entries to the asset catalog, so they would pop up in the asset browser. And yeah, one other thing I made was what you saw there was the animated preview for animation poses, which was pretty useful, I think, for animators, so they could actually see the animated poses being previewed, which I think would be a pretty cool feature added to Blender if someone wants to do that. Another thing we did was we had the animatic set up on the sequencer timeline, and I added a thing where you could just pick all the sequences you wanted to initialize shots with, and it would just create files for all of them, which was pretty helpful because of just the mass of shots we had. Here's a thing I did for rendering, like you could choose different types of renders so that, for example, to test renders, you could do the first and last frame only so you could see if there's anything messing up. And then eventually you could go to the full animation. Face rigs, yeah, the fun part. Yeah, that was the thing we thought about for a while. The issue, as Carol talked about, was that it's a lot of characters, and a lot of them, or most of them, have the same faces, and there's a couple of issues with that. Like, for example, you can also see some of them are not the standard characters, like you got the horse and the dragon and the ox there, or the frog all the way up there. Those are a little harder to do, so we really had to think about how we do that. So what I thought is they need to be linkable to all the characters, and non-destructive to the original characters. One thing we thought about doing was 2D sprites, where we just have just PNGs for all the different expressions. But I don't think that would have been flexible enough for having really nice, smooth animations. The other option would have been to have like a 3D setup that was actually inside of the characters, the 3D meshes. But the issue with that is that would have been a lot of work for all, how many, 34 characters? That would have been a lot of work. So the solution I went with was creating a custom GeoNode bool setup that let us like cut the faces in like a 2D way. I tried doing it first with like cutting them with actual bools, but that was really slow, so I had to do my own setup. Yeah, so here's an example of how flexible it was. You could make shapes like that if you wanted to. Here's what it looks like in the viewport. So it ended up turning into a regular facial rig, and you can see like all the splines of the curves that made the face had their own bones there. So I'll just walk you through how the setup sort of works. Yeah, one other thing is that the shapes have to be able to overflow the bounding shapes, like the tongue here. So I'll walk you through the tongue example. So this is what it looked like after it was all cut out. And you start with two shapes, the cutter shape and the inside shape that gets cut. And so the way that worked is we got the difference between the two shapes and one part, and we'd merge them together. So we got the like the diff between the two shapes, and then we put them together and merged the endpoints. Yeah, the magic part is right here, where you just raycast to the outside, and that would give us the part to cut away. And yeah, then just merge it together, find the bounding points and merge them, and smooth it out. Yeah, and then mesh it with like a really nice triangle topology there. And what that was able to do too is we could then measure the distance to the bounding curves, which I could use in the shader later on. So putting it all together, I could read those attributes in the shader and create a nice looking tongue shader there. And then each of the surrounding splines, the control points, got a hook modifier so that we could hook them onto the armature. That whole setup was a little tricky to get right too. Took a while, and shrink wrapping it to the mesh and having it parent correctly and not mess up. That took a bit of experimentation. So yeah, once it was done, you could do all that type of stuff. I was really happy that there wasn't a lot of glitching happening, because when I started experimenting with it, it was hard to get it to always perform correctly, but luckily that worked out. So yeah, here's an example of one of the more complex or the different characters is the dragon, where the face had to be able to rotate around, because in the concept, the face was on the side of the dragon, but it had to also be able to be in the front. Here's the frog, which was tricky because it had to be able to connect to the eyes, and they had to move around. So yeah, there you can see how the cutting works. Here's the snake, also a little different, just the eyes on that one. Yeah. Yeah, here's an actual shot, so you can see how that looks. Yeah, it was good because it actually performed pretty well in the viewport, which was nice. So the animators could actually see what was happening. If I had used the actual bools, it would have been a little less performant. Yeah, it mostly worked out. A couple of issues along the way, but overall, surprisingly, it worked out pretty well. And yeah, so now to the next part, the delivery part, the rendering part. We decided to use cycles. Don't know if, probably not the best decision in hindsight. And we rendered out a lot of view layers with a lot of different passes because Carol wanted to composite it in After Effects because he didn't have a lot of like Blender compositing experience yet. For the next production, we're probably gonna use Eevee and the real-time compositor. But for this one, we wanted the max control and wanted to use cycles, so that's what we ended up going with. Yeah, so I used my own render farm I started working on at the same time. It was the first renders we ever did on the farm, so there's a couple of issues. Nothing that wasn't able to be fixed, though. One of the cool things was that I mean, here you can see it rendering out on the farm. And one of the cool things was that we could see the different passes and view layers, like switch between them, which was good to troubleshoot that part because it was, as you can see, it was a lot of view layers. So yeah, that was the TD part. The bottom line of being a TD, I guess, is try not to frustrate artists. That's pretty much your job, is to make people happy and for them not to want to cry when they're working. Also, probably don't use Dropbox for productions. AWS, probably also not. So yeah, that was my part. And now Carol is going to talk a bit about the post-production, I think.
I completely forgot what the journey the phases were. Like, this was like, thank God you managed to do this. Yeah, the post was a little bit, it's more like, it's not about like really the post. You basically saw everything we did already. It's more about like a resume about like things that you already mentioned in terms of like EV cycles and comp and other love stories. We had the idea of like how to optimize it, and the thing that we actually needed to create the picture were pretty simple. And sometimes you have this kind of, you know what kind of vision you have, but you also know what possibilities, and there are some question marks. And depending on the production, these scale big, yeah? So, and we had the problem that we thought like, actually it's super easy to work with cycles, especially when we have like cringe solutions like with the faces, and we weren't sure like what kind of glitches could appear based on the animation and so on. We felt like, okay, cycles is the safe way. And on the other hand, I also tested Eevee, and we did both setups basically parallel, and it was in the end more like a decision that we had like 4 months left or something like that. And then it's more about like, do you know what you are doing, and is it the right tool, or do you try to experiment? And it feels like for us in the production, this was most of the time like the things that we needed to decide. The setup, what we did in comp was pretty simple. We tried to focus because we jumped so far into this kind of DMP, or the digital matte painting. We sometimes needed to reduce some of the detail or like guide the eye a little bit so it's not too crowded, yeah, because like the details that you need in a wide shot are a little bit different than that you need in a close-up, so you sometimes need to get rid of stuff, or gradients or light help you to denoise the picture a little bit and concentrate on what you actually get. In Germany, we call this Wimmel build, the picture which is just crowded, and kind of like some of the concept arts really looked like this. So this was basically what we needed to do, and depth of field. So these are actually easy things that we could also have done in Blender within the compositor. So this was also always a little bit the gradation. And post also means that you're rendering a lot of material that you then need to give someone else to render it again. And this is like, I don't know, we were super like, we didn't have big render times, but we had like something like 90,000 frames. And when you have 90,000 frames every second, it's like you're one step closer to dying mentally. In the end, for us, it was a decision between known enemy in terms of going to After Effects and doing the comp on our own in like in a traditional way where I know what I need to hate about it, versus the high chance that there is a moment when we reach episode 10 that suddenly everything flips around and the whole thing doesn't work anymore, and we don't have actually the time to iterate on that. Being on this stage now, for the next production, we would definitely enjoy just taking the time, 3 weeks or something like this, to explore the steps and the possibilities, just because the benefit would be so great. And it's sometimes hard, and sometimes we get too nervous about what we actually do, and then it helps to be convenient or to take the time to experiment a little bit. So this kind of balance between creativity and production is something that I would love to discuss also with other people in production. This is my first time at the Blender conference, and it's sometimes hard to say like, stop experimenting and keep this idea, and even if it's the coolest idea, but then when you're so in the end of the production, keep it, for the next project. Don't try to implement it. And we had this with grass, for example, with interaction stuff where we said like, oh, this is so cool, we need to do this. And as a passionate 3D artist, you always, this is the only thing that keeps you motivated, yeah? You don't want to kill these darlings, these small things where you see like, this is why I'm doing this is what's the fun part. But for production, it's sometimes the end when you start to get in this kind of loophole where you feel like, okay, but then this means this and this and this and this. So this kind of, that's for another project. Yeah, so that was it. In the end, I just want to, we are now working on the English version, so it's not just we are preparing the dubbing.
Tito, wait for me. Yeah! Yoo-hoo! Shh! It's starting. Dreamy glow. Glow of dreams. Let's dive into memory gleams. Wow!
Long, long ago, the night sky over Lusatia was clear.
Yeah, and in the end, I want to thank everyone which was involved in the project, or from the beginning on, from the concept development until from the partners that supported us to the whole team. Alex, Margarita, Esther, all the people that joined us during this time, and all the people that I'm also missing now. These are just the credits to show some of them. And yeah, we are super happy that we managed to do like a proper English version also, with also Childs as speaker, which was cool to work with. And we hope, like, we're going to release on October 5th, I think, in Germany. And we hope to find a partner for like international distribution. And then you maybe can see the little preschool series, or if you have kids, go for it. Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, if you have questions or if you want to contact us, we are super happy, and we love to share what we did wrong with everyone. So, thanks a lot.